The evening Marcus. No. The evening Neil came home to find his wife sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, and that particular expression on her face. He knew something was wrong. Not wrong in the way a bad day at work is wrong, or wrong in the way a forgotten anniversary is wrong. Wrong in the way that makes the air inside a room feel thinner, like the oxygen has quietly been replaced with something else entirely. Her name was Priya. She was 34 years old, a marketing consultant with a laugh that used to fill whatever room she was in. Neil had fallen in love with that laugh 11 years ago at a rooftop party in downtown Chicago, where she'd been standing near the railing with a group of colleagues, throwing her head back at something someone said, completely unbothered by who was watching. He had crossed the entire rooftop just to be near that sound. They had been married for 7 years. Neil set his laptop bag down near the door. He worked in civil engineering, the kind of job that required him to be precise and methodical, to read blueprints and structural reports with the understanding that any mistake, however small, could have consequences nobody could take back. He was 37, broad-shouldered, quiet in the way that people sometimes mistook for coldness. He was not cold. He simply did not speak unless he had something worth saying. "We need to talk," Priya said. He poured himself a glass of water and sat across from her. "Okay." She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. This was the gesture she made when she was nervous, and he had always found it endearing. Tonight it made his stomach tighten. "I've been thinking," she began, and then paused, as though the sentence she had rehearsed had suddenly rearranged itself. She started again. "You know my colleague Rohan?" Neil knew Rohan. He had met him twice, once at Priya's office holiday party 2 years ago, and once at a dinner with her team. Rohan was tall, worked in brand strategy, told stories loudly and often. Neil had shaken his hand and thought nothing more of it. "I know who he is," Neil said. Priya took a sip of wine. "There's something between us. Nothing has happened. I want to be clear about that. But there's something there, and I've been thinking that maybe I need to explore it." She said this last part carefully, like she was reading from a document she had edited many times. "Just one night. That's all I'm asking. One night, and then it's done, and we move forward. It doesn't have to be a big deal." Neil said nothing. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car passed on the street. The refrigerator hummed. "Neil." "I heard you." "Say something." He looked at her, really looked at her, for a long moment. He was looking for something, he realized. Some sign that she was testing him, or that this was the result of too much wine and a fleeting thought she'd spoken aloud without meaning to. But her eyes were steady. She had thought about this. She had decided on the phrasing. She had waited until a Tuesday evening, when the house was quiet and dinner was done, and she had sat down and said it like she was proposing a minor adjustment to their weekend plans. "Okay," he said finally. She blinked. "Okay? That's it?" "I need to think," he said. He stood, picked up his water glass, and walked to their bedroom. He closed the door behind him. Not a slam. Neil had never slammed a door in his life. Just a soft, deliberate click. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. What Priya did not know about her husband, what most people did not know, because he was not the kind of man who talked about himself at length, was that Neil had grown up watching his father be quietly destroyed. His father, Arvind, had been a gentleman, a high school mathematics teacher who loved crossword puzzles and old Hindi film music. His mother, Sheila, had been charming and restless, the kind of woman who needed more stimulation than a modest life in suburban Naperville could provide. She had cheated on Arvind 3 times over 12 years. Each time, Arvind had forgiven her. Each time, he had told himself and his sons that marriage was about endurance, that love meant absorbing pain without complaint. Neil had watched his father fold in on himself year by year. He had watched a man with dignity allow that dignity to be peeled away, layer by layer, in the name of keeping a household intact. Arvind had died at 61, 4 years ago. A heart attack, technically, but Neil had always privately believed that some part of his father had simply grown too tired to continue. Neil had made a decision, sitting at his father's bedside in the hospital in those last hours. He had decided that he would never mistake endurance for love. He would never confuse the ability to absorb punishment with strength. Real strength, he had come to understand, was knowing when something was over and having the courage to acknowledge it without theatre. He lay back on the bed, still in his work clothes, and stared at the ceiling. It doesn't have to be a big deal. He thought about those words for a long time. He did not sleep much that night. Priya had come to bed around midnight, and he had lain still, breathing slowly, and she had not tried to continue the conversation. Perhaps she had taken his silence for conflict avoidance, for the beginning of a negotiation, for the kind of stunned quiet that precedes an emotional outburst. She had no way of knowing that Neil's silences were not confusion, they were computation. By 4 a.m, he knew exactly what he was going to do. Not out of rage. He examined himself carefully for rage and found something quieter and more certain instead. A kind of grief, yes, but beneath the grief, an absolute clarity. He got up, made coffee, and sat at the small desk in the spare room where he sometimes worked from home. He opened his laptop. He began with the finances. Neil and Priya had a joint checking account and a joint savings account. They also had separate accounts, each with a modest balance. His salary was slightly higher than hers, but she had always managed the household budget, a division of labor they had settled into comfortably years ago. Over the next 2 hours, he moved his direct deposit to his personal account, transferred his contributions from the joint savings, no more, no less than what he had put in over the years. He had kept records, and made a list of every financial instrument that bore both their names. He was not trying to steal from her. He was trying to ensure that when the moment came, there would be no chaos. Chaos was how people got hurt in these situations, not by intent, but by the panic of being unprepared. He called his brother Karan at 7 a.m. Karan was 40, lived in Milwaukee, worked in finance. He was not an effusive man, but he and Neil shared the particular language of people who had grown up in the same difficult house and come out the other side understanding each other without needing to say much. "I need a recommendation for a family lawyer," Neil said. "Someone good, discreet." A pause. "How bad?" "I don't think it has to be messy, but I want to be prepared." "Give me an hour," Karan said. He also began keeping notes. Not accusatory notes. He was not building a case against Priya as a person, but he wrote down what she had said the previous evening, with the time and date. He wrote it in clear, plain language and emailed it to himself, so it was time-stamped and stored outside his local hard drive. He did not know if he would ever need this. He simply understood that preparation was not aggression. Preparation was protection. He thought about the apartment they had bought together 4 years ago. He thought about the mortgage, the furniture they had chosen together at a store in Lincoln Park over a long Saturday, the kitchen table she had found at an estate sale and refinished herself. He thought about all the ordinary objects of a shared life, and he felt the weight of them, and then he set that feeling aside because it was not useful right now. What was useful was moving carefully and moving with intention. Priya left for work at 8:30. She paused at the door of the spare room and looked at him sitting at the desk. "Are you working from home today?" "Yes," he said. "We should talk later," she said. Her voice was careful, slightly conciliatory. She had clearly spent the night recalibrating. "We will," he said. She left. He spent the morning on the phone with Eleanor Marsh, the attorney Karan had recommended. She was a family law specialist with 20 years of experience, and she had a manner that was direct without being unkind. He explained the situation plainly. She asked practical questions. By the end of the call, he had a consultation scheduled for the following day and a preliminary understanding of what the process would look like. Just so I understand, Eleanor said near the end of their call. There's been no physical infidelity yet. She's asked permission. Correct. And your position is that the request itself is a sufficient indicator of where the marriage stands? Yes, Neil said. I don't think the question is whether she's technically committed adultery. I think the question is what the request reveals about the state of things. And what I see is a marriage that's already moved somewhere I didn't agree to go. That's a reasonable position, Eleanor said. We'll talk more tomorrow. He also called a locksmith that afternoon. He scheduled the appointment for the following evening, after confirming with Eleanor that changing the locks was something he could do, given that the apartment was in his name. He had purchased it before they married, and Priya had moved in. The mortgage had always been his alone, a fact they had never treated as significant because their finances were otherwise integrated. It was significant now. He cooked dinner that evening. Pasta, simple, the kind of meal that required attention but not creativity. Priya came home at 6:30 and seemed surprised to find him in the kitchen. You cooked, she said. I did. They ate mostly in silence. At one point she started to raise the subject from the previous evening, and he said quietly, "Not tonight." Something in his tone made her stop. This was, he understood, part of what she had miscalculated. She had expected distress, tears, arguments, ultimatums delivered in raised voices. She had prepared for a negotiation conducted through emotion. She had not prepared for a man who had simply gotten very still. After dinner she watched television. He read in the spare room. At 10 o'clock he went to bed and slept better than he had expected. The consultation with Eleanor went well. She was thorough and clear, and by the time he left her office on Michigan Avenue, he had a complete understanding of what the next several months would look like, what his rights were, and what he could reasonably expect in terms of a settlement given their specific financial situation. He was not vindictive in his expectations. He did not want to damage Priya's life out of spite. He simply wanted to disentangle his life from hers with as much cleanliness and fairness as the situation allowed. He also, during this period, called his closest friend, a man named Omar, who had been his roommate in college and remained the kind of friend who showed up without being asked. He told Omar everything over lunch at a diner near Omar's office in the West Loop. Omar listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Neil valued most about him. "How are you doing?" Omar asked when Neil had finished. "I'm okay," Neil said. "I'm sad, but I'm okay." "You don't seem sad." "I am, though. She's not a bad person, Omar. She just made a decision. 2 decisions, really. The first was feeling whatever she feels for this other man, that I might have been able to work through with her. The second was sitting down at that table and asking me for permission to pursue it, like it was a reasonable request, like I was a business partner she was renegotiating terms with. That second one, that's what told me everything I needed to know." Omar nodded slowly. "What does she think is happening right now?" "I don't know exactly. She thinks we're in a tense period. Maybe she thinks I'm coming around. She's given me space, which I appreciate." He paused. "She'll know tomorrow evening." He had the locksmith come at 4 o'clock, while Priya was still at work. It took less than an hour. The locksmith changed the front door lock and the deadbolt, left Neil with 2 new keys, and that was that. Neil stood at the door after the locksmith left and looked at the lock for a moment, then went inside. He had already packed a bag for himself. He would stay at Omar's for a few days while the practical arrangements moved forward. He had already made sure that Priya's important documents, her passport, her social security card, items of that nature, were accessible in her desk drawer and had not been touched. He had already set aside, on the kitchen counter, the new key in an envelope with her name on it. Not because she deserved easy access. The point was that she no longer lived here. But because he believed that even in the ending of things, a person should be able to get their belongings without being made to feel criminalized. Beside the key, he placed the envelope from Eleanor's office. He looked around the apartment. He had spent 4 years in this space. He had carried Priya over the threshold of this apartment on the day they moved in together, 2 weeks before their wedding, which they had considered a ridiculous but charming tradition and had done anyway, laughing the entire time. He had learned to make her mother's recipe for dal makhani in this kitchen. They had ridden out the pandemic in these rooms for months, finding each other's rhythms with occasional friction and genuine tenderness. He had been happy here. He was certain of that. He had been genuinely happy, and for a long time, so had she. And whatever had shifted, whenever it had shifted, was not something he could fix, and not something he was going to try to fix by making himself smaller. He picked up his bag. He took a last look at the living room. Then he left and pulled the door shut behind him. Priya came home at 6:45, which he knew because she texted him at 6:50. "Key isn't working. Are you home?" Followed 3 minutes later by a call he did not answer, and then a longer, slightly more urgent text. "Neil, the lock is different. What's going on? Call me." He called her back after 10 minutes. "What is happening?" Her voice was confused more than angry. This was the phase before anger. He had anticipated this. "On the kitchen counter," he said. "There's an envelope with your name on it. Inside is a new key and a document from my attorney. Please read it." A long silence. "Your attorney?" "Yes." "Neil." "Priya." His voice was not raised. It was not cold either. It was simply level, the way his voice became when he was saying something he had considered carefully and fully meant. "I love you. I want you to know that I genuinely love you, and I don't think you're a terrible person. But I've thought about this, and I don't believe our marriage is somewhere I can stay. You told me what you needed. I'm telling you what I need, and what I need is to be with someone for whom I am not a thing to be managed or accommodated. You deserve to live the life you actually want. So do I." She was crying now. He could hear it. "You're overreacting." It was a conversation. We were supposed to talk about it. "We're talking about it now," he said. "The documents are preliminary. Eleanor, my attorney, has prepared them based on what a fair settlement looks like, given our specific situation. I've tried to be reasonable. If you want to contest anything, you're absolutely entitled to do that, and I'd encourage you to get your own representation." You planned this." The tears were mixing with something else now. Disbelief. The particular shock of realizing that the person you thought you understood had been somewhere entirely different from where you imagined them. "Yes," he said, "I planned this." "You could have talked to me. We could have gone to therapy. We could have." "We could have," he agreed. "But Priya, you didn't come to me uncertain, asking for guidance. You didn't come to me with a problem. You came to me with a request, and that's a different thing. That's the thing I couldn't get past." Another silence, longer this time. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "I really am." He ended the call. He stayed at Omar's for 5 days. During that time, Priya called 11 times, texted considerably more, and sent one long email that he read in its entirety. The email was painful to read, not because it was manipulative, but because it was not. It was honest. She talked about loneliness she hadn't known how to name, about feeling like she and Neil had slowly become more like competent cohabitants than partners, about Rohan representing something she had convinced herself was a symptom she could treat and release. She wrote that she had been stupid, that she understood now what she had done, that she was asking for another chance. He read the email 3 times. He sat with it for a full day before writing back. His response was short. He told her that he believed her. He told her he didn't think she had acted from malice. He told her that he wished her, with complete sincerity, a life that made her happy, and that he hoped she would do the work of understanding what she actually needed, not as a performance for reconciliation, but for herself. He told her he was not able to offer a second chance, not because he was incapable of forgiveness. He did not consider himself an unforgiving person, but because forgiveness and reconciliation were two different things, and he had learned, watching his father, that mistaking one for the other was how a person lost themselves one piece at a time. She wrote back once more, short this time. I understand. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. He believed her. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. It was not contentious. Priya had retained a thoughtful attorney and the two sides had negotiated reasonably. Neil kept the apartment and bought out her nominal stake in the furnishings. They split the joint savings fairly. There were no children, which made the practical elements more straightforward, even as it made the emotional reality more stark. Two people simply uncoupling from each other, returning to the separate coordinates from which they'd arrived. He saw her once during the process, at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Wicker Park, both attorneys present but seated at a distance. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had done a great deal of thinking. He thought she looked, beneath the tiredness, like a person who was perhaps arriving at a more honest version of herself, and he felt something for her in that moment that he could only describe as a kind of affectionate sorrow. They did not speak again after the final papers were signed, except once. A brief text she sent 6 months later, on the evening of what would have been their 8-year anniversary. It said only, "I hope you're well." He replied, "You too." And he meant it. Neil threw himself into work in the year that followed. A major bridge rehabilitation project on the south side gave him something large and concrete to pour his energy into, which he recognized was both useful and symbolic in a way that made him smile privately on occasion. He ran more than he had in years. He cooked elaborate meals on Sunday evenings and had Omar and his wife over regularly. He joined a reading group that met on Thursday nights in a bookstore on Belmont, where he was consistently the quietest person in the room and occasionally said something that made everyone stop and think. He was not fine immediately. He did not pretend to be fine. He missed the texture of a shared life, the ordinary, unremarkable things. The coffee made in the morning for two people, the shorthand of a long relationship, the specific comfort of being known. He grieved that. He gave himself permission to grieve it without treating the grief as evidence that he had made the wrong decision. He had not made the wrong decision. He was sure of this in the way he was sure of load calculations and stress tolerances, not through feeling, but through careful examination of all available data. What he had preserved in the end was not a sense of victory. He was not interested in victory. What he had preserved was the capacity to remain himself, to continue being a man who knew what he valued and acted accordingly. He had not punished Priya. He had simply declined to become someone else in order to keep her. He thought sometimes about his father, Arvind, about that small, contracting life, the crossword puzzles and the Hindi film music, the gentle man who had endured and endured until there was nothing left to endure with. He thought about what he would say to his father if he could. "It's not your fault," he would say. "You thought holding on was love. A lot of people do." And then, "But letting go can be love too. Letting go of the wrong things can be the most loving thing a person does for themselves." He was 38 now. The city was cold and bright outside his windows, the same windows he had looked out of throughout the worst and most clarifying year of his life. He had recently accepted a promotion that would expand his responsibilities significantly. He was, for the first time in longer than he could track, genuinely curious about what came next. He was not looking, particularly, for another relationship. He was not closed to one either. He understood himself better now, understood the difference between genuine connection and the comfortable familiarity that could masquerade as it. He understood what he needed, and he understood, just as importantly, what he was not willing to trade away in order to avoid being alone. Some doors, once closed, were closed for good reason. And the rooms they opened into, the ones you could only enter alone, sometimes turned out to be larger and better lit than anything you had expected. He poured himself a coffee. He stood at the window for a moment, looking at the street below, at the people moving through the ordinary cold Tuesday of their lives. Then he turned back to his desk and got to work.